So I'd like to invite our esteemed panel to the stage. Steve, please stay up. You've met him. Also, please, Brandon, Ignacio, please join us. And Kenny Aycock, I'll introduce him first as they come up. You can come up. It's OK. So Kenny will join us virtually. He's joining us not in his role that he played in the in-silico clinical trial. You may have noticed he was the first author on that publication. He was at the FDA at the time. He's now moved into industry, and he'll share his perspectives of what he's learned through the process, joining us virtually. And Ignacio Lagunas, please join us. So Ignacio is both a clinician. He shares a lot of the passion that we heard from Dr. Hoganson. He's also an innovator, inventor of his own.
Thank you.
Joining
Thank you,
us
Steve.
Ignacio, who's joining us from Argentina.
From Argentina, and also I work for LIU, Long Island University, Center of Excellence.
Yes.
So it's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, you'll be hearing more about our Center of Excellence in New York at Long Island University. I'd also like to invite up Brendan Freeman, who's co-founder of a company focused on bringing these technologies to bear. And so his company is focused on fusing the virtual twin technology, bringing the power of AI. We'll hear a little bit about how AI was used to generate the trial that was necessary. And he's here to really try to help make these technologies for real. So for the next 30 minutes, I guess we have, I'll be posing questions. I'll do my best to challenge them. If I don't like their answers, I'll make them do it again. And so we'll dig into this very important but complex topic. So first, maybe also by way of introducing yourselves, I'll put a general topic out there in what, from your perspective, what is the importance? Why does an in-silico clinical trial mean in the world that you live, the things that you think about? So maybe, Ignacio, you can kick us off.
Well, I think that, as we were talking before, in-silico clinical trials, and all this technology will come, whether we like it or not. It's not something we can avoid. Even if we want it, of course we don't want that, but it will come. It is already part of our clinical and our surgical decision-making process, but only for a few examples and just by selected groups that take this into consideration. I think that many colleagues, I would love to see more of my colleagues, surgical fellows and cardiologists, and more people from the clinical side joining us in this effort, because I think that there is still, we need to raise awareness about this technology, but one day the day will come in which this will be just one more way to do medicine. It will not be called as a virtual twin. It will not be something apart, okay? It will not be something strange. It will be part of our daily practice. So I think it's where we are heading to. We're heading to a paradigm shift. And so far, medicine has been about, I would say, reacting to a diagnosis and trying to treat a disease. But we need to move forward to something which is more predictable and also preventive medicine.
And is that, just to follow, so we heard earlier from Dr. Hoganson the idea that when the surgeon walks into the surgical room, he's already planned the surgery. Is that something that would be welcome, or is that just so uncomfortable for your colleagues?
It depends. It's tricky. I was thinking of David's examples, and for example, the patch, it's something fantastic. We still need to convince people that the patch is better than what they are judging. But it will come. Usually all innovations face some reluctance at the beginning, but there's no way, as they said, that this cannot be taken into consideration. The day will come in which this will be as using an X-ray to take some decision, of course.
Great. So now let me put it over to you, Kenny. Pop him up on the screen.
Hey, everyone.
Yeah, we can hear you. So again, you're now in the private sector. You have the ability to share your ideas freely, and you do as part of your job. So maybe having really been a leader in this field from the FDA for the last decade or more, what do you think this means to the industry that we're at this juncture and where we might go?
Yeah, so thanks for the introduction, Steve. I would have loved when I was at FDA to have been able to, I mostly reviewed durability evidence for implantable devices. And it would have been fantastic if we could have had testing to cover from the 5th to the 95th percentile human in that work. We didn't, right? We always had to make a lot of stacking assumptions to come up with some worst case, and you test a handful of specimens. And there's just so much opportunity to be able to wrangle real world uncertainty and bring that into our perspective for when we're evaluating devices. So I'm loving, I'm at the new company now, G.RAU Inc., where we are kind of a one-stop shop for developing medical implants, and the dimensional tolerances on like a laser cut strut, are a few percent, but the dimensional tolerances on a human patient, it's order of magnitude bigger difference, and the you have indications for use that tighten those somewhat, but still we're just dealing with so much uncertainty and variability when we treat real humans, and that's the part that we get to normally not put very much engineering focus on, but by bringing the idea of treating patients to the computer simulation, now we can actually consider the engineering implications of that human variability. So I'm overall just very excited that we could, as we advance this field, end up with a lot safer and more effective high quality devices for patients.
Yeah, fantastic. Just to follow up, it reminds me, and I've shared this occasionally, when we imagined this the enrichment project, it was in conjunction with Dr. Jeff Shuren, the CDRH director at the time. And his goal was to actually improve the reviewer's experience, to give better data, and for the purpose of getting the right decision and making it faster. And so I appreciate you sharing that, because it's really a win-win from both sides. And that's not always appreciated, that it's actually, there's no obstacles other than the work it takes to do it right. So Brandon, you're a seasoned entrepreneur. You've worked in the aerospace industry, the healthcare industry. Why now? Why are you focusing on this technology with your company?
Well, as Ignacio mentioned, I think, for those of you who have been coming to these conferences for the past several years, I think it's almost immediately apparent what the value to the healthcare industry, beyond even just clinical trials, is for being able to predict healthcare outcomes in advance. This is essentially what this is doing. I think, for me, one of the interesting things that I think about is what Michael alluded to earlier, which is how we can learn from the history of how this paradigm shift has taken place in other industries. For those of you who were here yesterday, this is, I think, the 5th or 6th industry that Dassault is introducing an entire paradigm shift into. As Steve mentioned, I came from defense, automotive, aerospace, where this is the de facto standard and de facto a way of doing business, a way of doing engineering in those spaces. And so I think it's really interesting to think about and look at those industries and how that paradigm shift was introduced, what barriers were in place, a lot of the things, Kevin talked about some of those in his talk, and how we can leverage the learnings from those industries to accelerate the adoption here, so that instead of it being a 20-year process, right, we can get this down to something where you're seeing this in place more broadly in the next few years, hopefully.
Great. Thanks. It is true, and for those of you who were fortunate to be here yesterday and maybe this morning, one of the great things about this conference is it brings together all industries to begin with. And as we heard, other industries have had the luxury of adopting these technologies earlier for a variety of reasons. But they give us a crystal ball into what's in our future. They're facing the challenges and tackling the challenges we'll have 5 years from now. And this conference is a great venue to see that and hopefully try to accelerate and anticipate it. So we've heard a little bit from you, Steve, but try Try to summarize, what did you take away from the experience, or when people are asked, okay, well, so what does it mean? What's the key message you take away from that?
What does it mean to run an in-silico clinical trial?
Yeah, well, to have completed it,
Yeah.
you know, have the guidelines published, pat ourselves on the back, we completed the project, got it published, now what?
Now what? Yeah, so I think it's a great question. In terms of what it means, I think what it means is we've set a standard and we've shown the way forward for industry. You know, I think the ideas that Brandon just summarized with respect to changing industries, many of the challenges that Kevin spoke about earlier, these are the sorts of things that we need to tackle. But what it means is that we have a roadmap. We have a playbook for how to do that. And in this industry, we tend to want to find case studies. We tend to want to find examples because there's a hesitancy to do new things. There's an inertia that Kevin alluded to. You know, he had that really big contraption on his slide that I thought was appropriate. It probably could have been larger. So there's a lot of inertia that we need to deal with. And so what I think it means, and what I am really proud of the team for having done, is really establish a way forward, a path forward, and to do so in a way that is flexible. Because what it means then is different companies with different products and different disease spaces with different challenges can go through a process and ask the same questions that we needed to address and we thought through, and really learn from that process and lean on our learnings to apply to their applications. So the people who were involved in that, the people who were paying attention, the various meetings that we had throughout that process to disseminate the information, the challenges, you know, I think that's really important. And one of the things that I think the leadership did really well in that process was to talk about the challenges. You know, we didn't go into a room and just, you know, turn the crank endlessly and come out with a pretty picture on the back end. We actually talked through those issues. It's one of the things that made the Living Heart Project so valuable, is the fact that we brought people together to work together, to learn from each other. And so, you know, that's what I think it means. I think it means it's a way forward, it's a roadmap, it's an atlas, whatever you want to call it. But it's a path forward for different industries, for different devices. And by industries, I mean different, like cardiovascular, orthopedics, whatever. But it's a way for different people to work together.
Right. Well, absolutely, and clearly that's really the context here. Is getting the multidisciplinary teams together is such a key piece. And one of those disciplines, and we'll hear a little bit more about this, and we've alluded to it, we heard it this morning in these keynotes, is machine learning and artificial intelligence is here to stay. It's a tool that we can really leverage, and in the project, it became essential to handle the complexity of the number of variables that were presented when you have to model an entire population. And a lot of people question, well, how can you trust AI on top of something you couldn't trust? So maybe Brandon, you have a little bit of experience working in the AI world. So what are your thoughts on maybe advancing the ideas in the V&V40, which are very precise engineering terms, to a world where we have dynamic intelligence?
Yeah, you know, I think this is one of the most fascinating areas of this whole space is AI in healthcare, and how rather than being something that's a competing technology with digital engineering or modeling and simulation, is actually something that can be supported tremendously. AI in healthcare has this traditional disadvantage, which are really two key points. The first is in training, and this is more LLM type models, if you will, or neural network based models. But a lot of AI models, an AI model basically is an inference model. It's making a guess. It's making an educated guess. And in order to train the model to make a accurate enough guess for use in a clinical environment, you have to give it a lot of data. And this obviously doesn't exist a lot of times in healthcare, which is why you have these very, very narrow LLM-based applications typically. This is actually where, and I'll use an analogy from another industry again, this is where modeling and simulation actually has this tremendous benefit to the AI domain or the data science domain. The analogy is if you, for those of you, especially if you live in Northern California, by me, you may remember that with the whole autonomous vehicle kind of development cycle over the last few years, maybe 5 or 10 years ago, you'd see all these cars out on the road taking all this LiDAR imagery off of real world drive miles, right? And that was because that's what they were training the models off of. They would drive 3,000 miles in a real car, taking real road imagery, and then they would train the vehicle autonomy model based on that. And what you saw is, at a certain point in time, it kind of hit this hiccup where it was not, those models were having a hard time going up the autonomy curve, right? And now, last week we're getting things where Tesla has Mad Max mode, where if you drive in Los Angeles or the Bay Area, you can turn that mode up. And the way they've been able to make these incremental gains now is actually through modeling and simulation using synthetic data. And so now what they do is, instead of driving real drive miles, they have simulations generating synthetic drive miles for edge case environments or other things that they can't capture in the real world, and they're using that data to build a large enough or robust enough data set to train models, right? So that handles that training problem. The other cool part about it is it eliminates a lot of the black box nature of these inference models, because when you're leveraging modeling and simulation as a companion to a lot of these AI models, you're able to, leveraging things like the V40 framework, able to demonstrate that digital thread right back from the outputs coming from these models all the way through the inputs. So I think there's a lot of potential to couple those two technologies together in a meaningful way for healthcare.
So I'm pretty simple about these things. So what you're saying is sort of the idea that we use flight simulators to train pilots. Mm-hmm. Instead of putting them in planes to train, we use synthetic environments that have been validated to represent, so that they can actually train and understand the realistic world safely and ethically. What a great idea. So not to put you on the spot, Kenny, but we lived through the process of understanding what turned out to be 6 different models in the in-silico clinical trial, some of which are physics-based models, some are data-driven models, some are logical models. Any thoughts on the importance of matching the right model to the right problem, so that we can, we heard a little bit, particularly from Kevin, about models should be as simple as possible, but no simpler. And any takeaways from that process of expanding from trying to model the entire clinical experience from first principles?
Yeah, great question, Steve. So, I've been thinking about the more complex you make a model, the more decisions you have to make, right? As you say, each of these aspects is potentially very critical to predicting clinical outcomes, especially when we're considering the variability in patients, the variability in the device environment. So I think what really needs to happen is there needs to be some conscious effort from the community to consider what problems we're tackling, because that's where we think about the device, but the patient population, the pathology of interest, that's going to influence what models we can take on and make progress with. And we need to really critically consider what types of safety and effectiveness endpoints we can predict. And there's going to be low-hanging fruit all over the place as we advance our modeling capabilities, as we advance the data, we couple in AI and machine learning, we're going to have a lot of opportunities. There's going to be some problems we probably should stay away from and not tackle still too, though. And I think we need to be conscious of that and really have the validation in mind, that validation data set. Find that first. Like, find applications where we know the right answer from clinical data, from clinicians' experience, and then get back to that right answer with our model. And if we can do that and ground ourselves, then there's just so much skepticism that goes away. When you bring someone convincing evidence that you can predict the outcome, and the work that Dr. Hoganson is doing, with 19 100 patients. That's just fantastic. And if we can demonstrate that we can predict on a single patient level, we do surgical planning and have those outcomes very, very dramatically and obviously make positive impact, then translating that to virtual cohorts just becomes such a more natural process.
Yeah, fantastic point. So I'm not going to put you on the spot, Kenny. I'm going to put Steve on the spot with this, because I get this question a lot. I'm sure we all do. What is the FDA really thinking about this? Or more importantly, assuming that they're open to collecting this data, what are your thoughts based on the interactions 5 years working with the folks at the FDA, the best practices that they would ask of industry to actually use this kind of data? Any comments?
Yeah, absolutely. So it can be a challenge, no matter how open-minded folks like Kenny and some of his cohort may be with respect to modeling and simulation evidence. It can obviously be a challenge. And I think the most important thing that is repeatedly emphasized in this process is to have conversations throughout the process as you get into the modeling, as you scope out the modeling, as you think about the modeling. I love the aspect of the FDA guidance that specifically says have a Q-sub meeting. So for those who are not familiar, you can have discussions prior to submitting, your documents and everything, that really just, you ask questions and there's answers and there's a discussion back and forth, and there's different structures on that and so forth, obviously, but the emphasis on that is so critical because everybody is going to be coming at the problem from a different perspective. Kenny brings up the point about low-hanging fruit. Every organization, every product that's going to be developed is going to have different low-hanging fruit. You're going to have different applications. You may have different validation evidence that's available to you depending on the maturity of your organization, et cetera. So everybody's going to have a slightly different scenario. And so that's why it's so important that you go through and have these conversations up front. You obviously need to have them internally, but going to the regulators, talking through these things, having examples, having a plan, and discussing just what your goals are. Again, Kenny mentioned goals. I think that's incredibly important to articulate. What are you trying to do with this? How does this fit into the framework of all the other evidence that you're going to be able to bring to bear, and why do you need to use modeling and simulation? So just having those discrete answers and having that conversation, incredibly important, and it's something that everybody can do. There's people who are afraid of taking these conversations to the FDA, but if you really want to have modeling and simulation evidence as part of your portfolio and you see the value in it, which is obviously there, we've talked about it all day, if you really want to take advantage of that, you have to take that step of having those conversations.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, I think I second that. The openness is clear, but set realistic expectations. I think that's the key. Okay, so let me switch a little bit more to adoption, because we heard a lot about that early on, which I love that we're not questioning the if, it's now we're at the how. We heard a lot from the large company perspective, the big machine that has to move. But what about the small companies, the innovators, right? They're usually the place where disruption happens. So maybe wearing your innovator hat, Ignacio, what will it take for the innovators to say, hey, why don't I go this route instead?
Well, I think that in-silico trials are have to be a big part of the innovation. In our case, I have a company which is called Avatar MedTech, in which we have two kinds of innovation. We have innovated on the morphology and the concept of the aortic and the pulmonary valve. And at the same time, we have another part, which is the commercial part, in which we have developed a set of medical devices to reconstruct that valve with our autologous tissue. And we think that in both innovations, in-silico simulations are critical. We use design tools all the time to improve the designs of our devices, but at the same time, we do tests to try to understand the behavior, in our particular case, of the aortic valve over time when the patient grows. So I think that's an essential part, and we are doing that at LIU. And what we found, curiously, for me, probably not for you, is that as we had already done in vitro and in vivo tests of our new design, when we built the valves in silico and we tested these oversized designs, we found out that these designs mimicked reality in an amazing way. We found the same features. So that's what I said, okay, this works. This really works. So that was, for me, really something that changed my mind as a concept. So now what I think is that these virtual cohorts of patients need to be built. We need to bring in silico simulations to our companies, medical devices, designs. All these concepts need to be tested. But one more thing that I want to say is that we need to be very careful regarding democratization, which I think is a challenge that maybe we haven't talked about too much. I'm a surgeon. I spend part of my time in Argentina operating on patients. I do research here in the US, but I also travel and see other communities in which we see patients that do not get access even to a CT. So my question is, how will we manage data in such a way that we will train these models to work as predictors if we do not involve from the very beginning the data of all the population, the whole population? So I think that one important key is to democratize in silico trials from the very beginning, including people that is out there that has no representativity and needs to have that for the good of all of us. Okay. At the end of the day, we have a finite number of diseases. In 100 years, we will have them probably all solved, and thanks to this technology. So we will be, at that point, I think, trying to tackle disparities and trying to make this technology available for the whole world.
Yeah, well, certainly that's a key factor, and again, we heard about underrepresented population children. As most of you know, pediatric clinical trials are not that popular for obvious reasons. This is a great advent, I think, for that population, and I know that's something you're active in and something I care very much about, and I'm sure everybody does. So from an industrial perspective, maybe Brandon, you could share some ideas on how people should be looking at in silico clinical trials. What's the measure of success? What are they going for? Saving money, better designs, faster route to market, more inclusion, better labeling? What's the target?
Well, maybe I'll make a couple of points there. I like that slide Kevin showed earlier with the whole product development life cycle. I think we're talking about clinical trials, which is at the end of that, right? But I think overall there's this opportunity to shift that left and leverage modeling and simulation for every single aspect of that development life cycle, because the earlier you go, the more value that's going to drive. But I think starting in clinical trials is really a great place. And I think from the folks that we talk to, I think really the predominant value is actually in risk management. We shared some statistics earlier about the success rate for MedTech clinical trials. Biopharma even lower, right? And this industry is one of the few industries that has this crazy current paradigm, which is you spend all the money developing a product, then you validate that it's safe, right, for use in humans, and then finally at the very end you validate if it actually works, right? Every other industry is you're from the design phase, right? You're validating that the product works before the very end. And so from the folks we talk to, I think the ability to basically do almost in-house clinical trials, if you will, earlier in that development life cycle is where by far the most value exists, even beyond schedule compression and cost reduction and things of that nature.
Great, thanks. All right, so we just got about 2 minutes left, so I'm going to give you all sort of open stage to dream. I'll start with you, Steve, since you let us off. Where are we going to be 5, 10 years from now in the clinical trial world, or where should we be?
Well, where I hope we are is exactly what Brandon just talked about. This idea of validating product performance and safety up front. I go back to, on that point, and that comment makes me think about the quote, and I think it was Mark Andreessen who said this back in the day about software. He said, software was going to eat the world. And when we look at investments and we look at everything that's happening with AI and everything else, it's clear that money and productivity and tools and efficiencies are coming from software. We have an opportunity in this industry through tools like in-silico clinical trials to really bring the same paradigm shift to MedTech and to biotech and other industries related to life sciences, where we can simulate things, we can do this product development, we can evaluate products and designs and concepts up front, which would then open up so much more from a product development perspective, because you think about the wasted dollars on products that fail. If we turn those into products that were successful, then we'd really be able to move the needle with respect to the healthcare industry, efficiencies, cost per patient, all these sorts of things. We have that ability with these tools. We just need to unlock it, and we need to be thinking about using things like in-silico clinical trials to do things like Brandon's talking about, where we are evaluating products up front before we get into all of those gory details of V&V and whatnot.
Great. Kenny, thoughts on where we should be skating to for the future?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I think definitely everything starts at the individual patient level. Getting them better treatment and having simulation impact their treatment is just incredible opportunity for everyone. And as we do that, we're going to learn so much, have so much data that is generated that will then inform the next logical progression is to have those virtual cohorts come to bear that have been supported by very clear evidence and track records like we've again have been talking about earlier today. So I think there's just going to be a natural progression of both increasing capability and increasing confidence and increasing acceptance as that progresses, and just when you bring benefit risk to table and it's undeniable that the benefit outweighs the risk, there's just going to be a lot of progress.
Great. Ignacio, what do you think? What's your hope for the community?
Well, what I want is that in 5 years, I have my next patient virtual twin in my hand. I can practice my operation there and then bring it to real life in the OR with excellent results.
Fantastic.
That's what I would love to have.
Okay, that's our goal. We got a mission. Brandon, you get the final word.
Maybe I'll point back to one of Steve's slides and answer the question slightly differently. I hope 5 years from now we're all here in this same room, but with 10 times as many people. And I think that one of the things I'll just throw out for this group to consider is one of the determinants of if it's going to be a group of 600 people or a group of 6,000 people is what Steve alluded to, which is really standards and interoperability. I think the Living Heart project is an incredible example of what you can do when you get a critical mass of folks. But there's many other systems of the body. As we know, many of the drugs and devices that we work on operate across systems, and so that interoperability and that ability to drive some standardization around that is, I think, a key thing that we can all focus on to help accelerate that, so that in 5 years that that twin and that device is in your hand.
Well, thanks, Brandon. Clearly, and I'll touch on that in my closing remarks tomorrow as well, because I think that's the call to action for the community, and I really appreciate everyone. Please join me in thanking them all for their time.